Could President Trump's decision to fire Attorney General Jeff Sessions become the nail in the obstruction of justice coffin for the president? We know Robert Mueller wants to interview Trump about his attempt to get Sessions to unrecuse himself from overseeing the Russia probe. We know, based on reporting from the New York Times, that Robert Mueller has 8 questions for the president, specifically about his interactions with Jeff Sessions. With so much potentially at stake, so much possible legal exposure for the president, why did he fire Sessions yesterday? What could possibly be worth that risk? New reporting from the Washington Post might offer some clues. According to the Post, quote, acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker has no intention of recusing himself from overseeing the special counsel probe of Russian interference in the 2016 election. And this, quote, 2 people close to Whitaker said they strongly believe he would not approve any requests from special counsel Robert S. Mueller to subpoena the president. Now, we don't know if Robert Mueller was planning to subpoena the president anytime soon, but we do know he's given Trump every opportunity to get his side of the story on the record. Mueller haggled with Trump's former attorney, John Dowd, for months about an in-person interview, until Dowd resigned rather than let Trump sit down with Mueller. According to Bob Woodward's book, Fear, Dowd pleaded with Trump. Quote, I wish I could persuade you, Dowd said. Don't testify. It's either that or an orange jumpsuit. Mueller even told Trump's lawyers 2 months ago that he'd accept written answers from Trump. But just this afternoon, Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, acknowledged to Politico that Trump still hasn't submitted the answers. That leaves a subpoena as a logical next step for the special counsel, opening up a high-stakes line of questioning. Has Donald Trump appointed in Matt Whitaker someone who is likely to turn down any request from Mueller to subpoena the president? And did Whitaker make that promise to Trump or anyone close to him before he took the job as acting AG? And if either of those answers is yes, does that represent obstruction of justice? Here to help try and answer that question for us, some of our favorite reporters and friends. Devlin Barrett, one of the reporters on that story from the Washington Post. Katie Benner, who covers the Justice Department for the New York Times. Former chief spokesman for the DOJ, Matt Miller. Harry Littman is a former U.S. attorney and deputy assistant attorney general. And Jonathan Lemire is on set, White House reporter for the AP. Matt Miller, let me start with you because you were here in this hour yesterday. We were talking about this in more theoretical terms, still figuring out who Matt Whitaker is. The Washington Post has reported today that Matt Whitaker is someone who is not inclined to approve a subpoena from Robert Mueller for this president.
Yeah, it's fairly remarkable that he has already apparently reached that conclusion before being briefed on the case. He has reached the conclusion that he's not going to recuse himself before he apparently has consulted with ethics officials about whether that would be appropriate. It looks like that the president has put Matt Whitaker in this job precisely for the reason that is perfectly obvious to everyone, that he expects him to come in and somehow either slow down or curtail or shut down the investigation. You know, one of the cliches that I think is misused most often in Washington is the idea that the cover-up is worse than the crime. You know, oftentimes people like the president right now, like I believe the president's doing right now, execute cover-ups because the underlying crime is terrible and they know that they're going to get caught. And to see the president, you know, to do something that is so transparent and so obvious and so ham-handed, it just makes me wonder what he thinks or maybe what he knows is coming down the pike next from the special counsel's office.
Harry Littman, can you jump in about whether or not, we already know that the president's conduct vis-a-vis Attorney General Jeff Sessions is so suspect that Robert Mueller, I think there are 49 questions total, 8 of them are specifically about Donald Trump's interactions with Attorney General Jeff Sessions, his decision to recuse, conversations about whether he would unrecuse, conversations about whether to fire him. He submitted his resignation once before. Can you explain how, if those things are under scrutiny for obstruction of justice, it seems perfectly logical that firing him abruptly yesterday might also be?
Can I explain? Yeah, in a word, brazenness. It certainly could potentially be one of the things that Mueller considers. It's certainly, as Matt says, there's one reason and one reason only that Whitaker is appointed, and that's to put the boot on the neck of the Mueller probe. He's got really no credentials at all other than personal loyalty to Mueller, and it would be, in fact, a kind of cover-up in plain sight. You could think of legal arguments that one could make when push comes to shove about why he disapproves this or that specific step by Mueller. But basically, there's, I think it's all pretty transparent. And as Matt suggests, Trump does it because he thinks he can. Now, of course, there's a new cop on the beat with the House Judiciary Committee, and we'll see if that's right. But I don't think there's any secret here. It's just the brazen president.
Devlin, it's your reporting that we've been talking about. Take us through what you guys are reporting and what people should know about the new acting Attorney General, Matt Whitaker.
So the new acting Attorney General comes from a very strange place when it comes to picking an Attorney General, and that's the Chief of Staff of the recently departed Attorney General. That's a very rare way for this to work. Normally, the Chief of Staff is someone who's fundamentally loyal to the Attorney General, and in this case, Matt Whitaker is now the acting Attorney General. And what we're told is that ethics officials, and we're also told that he has already expressed in different venues at different times a real disagreement with the very notion that the president should be issued a subpoena. That's important because the threat of the subpoena is the thing that has been hovering over those negotiations all this month. And if you take away that threat of a subpoena, you would then have a situation where one side doesn't have really much leverage anymore.
Devlin, and the threat of a subpoena is not a legal tactic. It is a way to get the truth. I mean, I guess it is both. It is both a legal tactic that prosecutors and investigators deploy, but it's also almost a last-ditch effort if Mueller seeks permission to subpoena the president from, I guess, until yesterday it would have been Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. It would have been a last attempt to get the truth. It's abundantly clear, and we included John Dowd's comments as Bob Woodward reported them in his book Fear, because no one who represents the president in a legal capacity thinks he can tell the truth.
Well, right. And, this whole fight over this whole negotiation has been a dance, right? And now they've basically, if the subpoena is taken off the table, and that's still an if, but we're definitely getting signals that may very well be taken off the table, I think, frankly, the music stops and there's no more dancing anymore because you have no way to force their hand from the prosecutor's point of view. And it's everyone's trying to figure out, like, who makes the next move at that point.
Katie Benner, if you could weigh in what you and your colleagues have reported about being Rod Rosenstein, not just over the last 17 months, but today. Today, Rod Rosenstein, it's my understanding as of this morning, was still the DOJ official ostensibly in charge of the Mueller probe, but that could change any moment. Sarah Igor Flores put out a statement yesterday. Right, saying that Matt Whitaker is now in charge of all investigations and all matters at the Justice Department.
Of course. I mean, very rarely do we ever even know who the Deputy Attorney General is. I would say that Rod Rosenstein has been in a unique position because he's been handling the highest profile and what some people would call arguably the most important case the Justice Department has handled in quite a long time. Now, by having Matt Whitaker oversee it, immediately Rod Rosenstein becomes far less significant. He becomes far less of a problem for the White House, but also he has far less power. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not he even wants to stay on now that he no longer has control of this incredibly consequential case, or if he wants to retire, which, he's talked about numerous times, especially in light of the reporting that the Times did, saying that he had that he had doubts about the president after Comey was fired, that he had threatened or spoken of possibly secretly taping conversations with the president. His future at the department has been very, very precarious anyway. And now that he is no longer in charge of this high-profile investigation, it might be the time for him to step down before he's pushed out.
Katie, you and your colleagues also, we've been talking about an investigation that most reasonable people would like to see continue, the Mueller probe. There are other investigations that the president and his allies are interested in seeing commenced, and you report this. Your paper reports Mr. Whitaker and Mr. Trump also share similar views on what they consider the need for a special counsel to investigate Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server. The FBI investigated but closed the case without bringing charges in 2016. Mr. Sessions rebuffed calls for another special counsel. In 2014, Mr. Whitaker became the executive director of the Conservative Foundation for Accountability and Civic Trust, known as FACT. The organization called itself a watchdog group and mainly made accusations of ethical or legal violations against Democratic politicians, including Mrs. Clinton. Now, I recall Jeff Sessions and Rod Rosenstein being peppered, and that's a nice word, by House Republicans like Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows and others about appointing a second special counsel. They testified under oath that that was not necessary. Could Whitaker reopen that Pandora's box?
Sure, Whitaker most certainly could. And if he does, I think the next question then is, what happens to morale at the Justice Department? These cases, especially the Hillary Clinton case, has been adjudicated so many times, including with an Inspector General's report. I think to reopen the matter might have some serious consequences for how people feel inside of the building, how they feel about working on the case, and how they feel about working for Matt Whitaker. And of course, it makes the Justice Department a spectacle yet again, and a huge, and catnip for ultra partisans on both sides of the aisle who really want to fight about Hillary Clinton. I don't think it's a place that anybody at the Justice Department would want to be.
Jonathan Lemire, it's just a remarkable turn that Donald Trump, who is under active investigation for obstruction of justice, fires one of the witnesses in the obstruction of justice case, and in his place installs someone who's interested, who shares his passion and zeal for investigating Hillary Clinton again.
That's right. And according to our reporting, this, as much as there are certainly overtones here, it's the tactical overtones about the Mueller probe, this also, the decision to fire Sessions was just sort of almost an instinctual move by the president, who's wanted to do this for months. More than anything, he just was tired of having the guy around. He was so upset by Sessions' decision to recuse himself. For him, that was the original sin that he could never forgive. That he was, as you know, that for months wanted to do it and was talked out of it by some of his closest aides, both inside and outside the White House. Rudy Giuliani told me a few weeks ago that he had repeatedly had to tell him, they threw his body in front of that, like, don't do it. That's the worst thing you can do for this probe. And Trump, who's never likes to be told no, agreed begrudgingly to hold off for a little bit. But literally, the votes were still being counted in these midterms, and he agreed to hold off until then, and then he finally decided enough's enough. But now, of course, it has this repercussion effect.